And now I would like to introduce the Boulder County District Attorney, Michael Dougherty. For the past 8 years, he has earned a statewide reputation for leadership, accountability, and compassion. Shortly after moving to Colorado, Michael led the criminal justice section of the Colorado Attorney General's office, overseeing teams handling homicide, public corruption, financial fraud, environmental crimes, and law enforcement accountability all across the state. Early in his career, Michael spent over a decade as a prosecutor in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, where he specialized in sex crimes and homicides. Tonight, he's here to talk to us about standing up to ICE, but I also want to let you know that he's running for Colorado Attorney General because he has a proven track record of fighting for justice and doing it with integrity. Michael, please take it away.
Well, Tiffany, thank you so much for that kind introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michael Dougherty. I'm the District Attorney of Boulder County. I appreciate the mission, dedication, and energy of this group. It's groups like this one that fill me with hope that we're going to flip the House this year and hold Donald Trump accountable. The fight for our democracy is on. That's why I've been doing immigrant protection work for years, but it's never more important than it is right now. And I'll jump into the presentation, and I'm going to see the greatest challenge I may have tonight is seeing if I could share this screen successfully, but we'll see if I could pull that off and then launch right into the presentation. So I'll highlight a couple things as I jump in. I know that not everyone here on this call is in Colorado. So when I talk about the law, I'll make sure to reference what the law is in the state of Colorado. But I do think some of the lessons that can be learned from what we've done in Colorado can be applied elsewhere. Colorado has taken really significant and positive steps to improve upon and expand immigrant protections throughout the state of Colorado. And I think in a lot of ways, we have more protections in place than other states. Those only work, those only have value and meaning if people are aware of what those protections and rights are, first and foremost. And second, that we hold ICE fully accountable when they violate the law here in Colorado. So I'll be talking about both those things as we go through this. This is a topic and an issue that I'm very passionate about. You may see that I'm in a really far more colorful office than the district attorney's office. I'm actually at Rocky Mountain Equality, which is a group that does incredible advocacy and support work for LGBTQ plus community members. And I'm here at Rocky Mountain Equality because I work really closely with them. And right now, a lot of the attacks on our immigrant communities are similar to the attacks on our trans communities. So I've been working really closely with Rocky Mountain Equality for years, and I happen to be here today for a meeting, and they kindly allowed me to use their office space for this presentation tonight. So I'm going to jump right in, and I'll talk with you about how I first got focused on this work and some of the things we've done in Boulder County, but then expand it and talk about what we're doing here in Colorado as a state. So the picture on your screen hangs on the wall of my office in the district attorney's office, where I've been serving as DA since 2018. The gentleman on the right-hand side of your screen is my grandpa, Michael Dougherty. And the gentleman on the left is my dad, Jim Dougherty. And my dad was a public school teacher. And on this particular day, my grandpa had been invited into the class to talk about why he came to the United States of America from Ireland. My grandfather and my other three grandparents all emigrated from Ireland to the United States for the freedoms and opportunities this country offered to them then. And I'm always humbled and honored by their journey and the fact that not that many years later, I'm speaking with you tonight as the elected district attorney of Boulder County, running for Attorney General of Colorado. And that really is the embodiment of the American dream and what brought them, all four of them, to this country. And it's a dream and an opportunity that are denied to so many right now. The other reason this picture hangs on the wall of my office and that I show it to you tonight is that this picture was taken on Immigrant Day. The names of the other immigrants who are going to speak with the class are on the right-hand side of the chalkboard behind my grandfather. And on the left-hand side of the chalkboard is the poem by Emma Lazarus, which appears on the pedestal of the Statue of Liberty. We need to return to a time where immigrants in this country are celebrated, where we're proud of the fact that people come to the United States of America for freedom and for opportunity, instead of villainizing them and demonizing them and letting it be one of the most divisive issues that we have in the United States right now. So this picture is always an inspiration to me as I talk about immigrant protection and what we can do going forward. Because when I think about this picture and I look at this picture, to me, these kids are in class learning about the journey of an immigrant. Tonight, I'm going to be talking to you about whether ICE needs a search warrant to get into schools and if they need a warrant to get past the lobby of a public school. We need to survive this threat to our democracy. We need to fight like heck for our values and our future and return to a time where immigrants are celebrated. So, I'm going to be talking about the role of ICE, legal protections that we have in place for immigrants in Colorado, how to protest safely, the authority of state and local law enforcement, and also how to report misconduct. But I really want to emphasize right at the start that ICE is now the largest federally funded law enforcement agency in the United States of America. And as a prosecutor and as a leader, I've had the responsibility of working with other federal law enforcement agencies, including the FBI. So, for example, I prosecuted the King Soopers mass murder case where 10 of our community members were gunned down here in Boulder at a supermarket. I handled that case myself. I handled the trial, and the defendant was held fully accountable. The FBI was a good working partner on that case. I'm currently handling the Pearl Street firebombing, where last June, June 1st, an individual carried out a horribly anti Semitic act of terror and hate and committed a firebombing against members of our community in Boulder. Again, the FBI was a good partner. So, on the investigation side. So, the idea that ICE is now receiving the largest amount of funding of any law enforcement agency in the United States says so much about the agenda, angle, and misguided vision of a president and his lawless administration. They're getting $45 billion at a time where people are having trouble putting food on the table. And to me, that is outrageous. The other outrageous part of this is that the $45 billion goes to private prisons, where the United States of America is currently buying up warehouses to literally warehouse people. Private prisons should be banned in the state of Colorado and throughout the United States of America. And I will continue to fight for that. At the state level and at the federal level, we should not allow private for profit corporations to make money off the backs of people who are in their custody. To me, it defies who we are supposed to be as a country, and I will continue to stand strong and work with other allies in fighting against private prisons. There are things we could do right now to fight for the rule of law and a better future for us and for our families and immigrants in our communities as well. One is protest. So let's not lose sight of the power of the people. There are forces at work that want us to feel powerless and overwhelmed. Solidarity Warriors, I think, demonstrates how important it is to come together and how important it is to unite and to stand and fight for what we believe in. And we've seen protests work. We've seen public outcry work. One quick example would be when the Republicans were trying to sell off public lands for profit in last July's horrible tax bill. That provision around selling off public lands got stripped from the bill because of the public outcry. That is a really significant example of the power of the people. Also, legislations. We've put significant protections for immigrants in place here in Colorado as a result of the legislature being willing to take on this work and pushing forward bills and us getting them passed into law. And the third is the courts, where I view as a prosecutor and a leader of large law offices throughout my career, Manhattan DA's office, the Colorado Attorney General's office, and as the district attorney for Boulder County, the courts and the rule of law right now is the defense we have against the Trump administration. One quick example of that from my perspective is when the US military was ordered to patrol and police our cities, a role they should never have, a role that violates the United States Constitution. The only reason the US military is no longer occupying our cities is because the attorneys general for each one of those states brought lawsuits against the Trump administration. And they won again, and they won yet again, and then yet again. And as a result, the US military has pulled out of those cities. So to me, that's an example of the power of the rule of law and the importance of having attorneys general around the country, especially at a time where Congress is relatively dysfunctional. Attorneys general around the country are going to stand and fight for the rule of law. So we've had in my jurisdiction a DA immigrant protection program since I became district attorney. So I'll touch on this because I would hope that every district attorney around the United States and here in Colorado develops an immigrant protection program. I've had it in place as the district attorney for Boulder County since 2018 because although our immigrants are being attacked right now and kidnapped off our streets and deported without due process, Immigrants have been deserving of protection from the justice system for years and across different presidential administrations. So I'll give you two quick examples. One is, I think you'd agree with me that when someone is a victim of domestic violence or sex assault, they should be able to call 911 for help and have the police respond. They should be able to go to the hospital for treatment and get care for their injuries and come to the Justice Center so the offender can be held accountable without fear that the victim and their loved ones are going to be deported as a result of picking up the phone to call 911. Also, I strongly believe that individuals who are being prosecuted, defendants, have rights under the Constitution as well. They should be able to come to the courthouse without fear they're going to be deported when they arrive at the courthouse. And as a prosecutor, I want to see cases through to completion. So if I'm prosecuting someone for sex assault on a child, to me, it's an absolute failure for ICE to swoop in and deport that person, as they have, while the case is pending. This is an issue, by the way, that the 23 elected district attorneys for the state of Colorado are all united on. We have different views on immigration, we have different philosophies and different approaches. But on those 2 points, that victims and defendants should be able to come to the courthouses in Colorado without fear of being picked up and deported, we are actually united. And I think that says something about a shared commitment to doing justice and how far and how abhorrent the Trump administration has ordered ICE to go. In Boulder County since 2018, the police chiefs and the sheriff have agreed with and adopted my policy. And for the last 8 years, they have never asked any single person in the community for their status in this country. And if they found out, they would never report and have never reported it to the federal government. We have 8 years of a success with that policy. Never once have we failed or slipped up. And I think it's significant that it's not just me as district attorney, but if you go on our Facebook page, for example, in the last week, I've done two Know Your Rights presentations with the same PowerPoint with leaders in law enforcement standing alongside me. And I think that's really powerful, particularly when we have immigrants in the room, which we have for a lot of these presentations, for leaders in law enforcement to be standing in uniform next to me saying exactly what I'm saying, and that ICE is going to be held fully accountable when they commit crimes in Boulder County. So these Know Your Rights presentations are really important. We have a U visa program where if someone's been a cooperative witness or victim in a case, we can apply to the federal government for them to be able to remain in the country lawfully for a period of time. The fight for legislative changes is still on, but we've actually been able to expand protections here in Colorado. Last year, I was asked, because of my work with law enforcement in Boulder County and ensuring that people were not being asked about their status or their status being reported to the federal government, I was asked to help lead an effort to make that mandatory for law enforcement all throughout the state. And now, under the law in Colorado, no member of law enforcement is allowed to ask a person their immigration status. And if they learn it through a discussion or an interview, they're not allowed, they're absolutely prohibited from providing that information to ICE. That's the law in the state of Colorado. I'll give you one quick example of the law actually being used to hold people accountable. We had a Mesa County Sheriff's deputy. Mesa County's out on the western slope of Colorado. Mesa County Sheriff's deputy who pulled over a young woman traveling from Utah along I-70, our major highway, towards the Denver metro area. He conspired via text message with ICE. So when he finished his traffic stop and released the young woman, she was picked up a few minutes later on the side of the highway after being pulled over by ICE and taken into custody for deportation proceedings. Once that was discovered, the Attorney General, Phil Weiser, brought a civil suit against the sheriff's deputy, because that's one of the powers that we secured under that state bill we got passed last year. That sheriff's deputy is no longer a member of the sheriff's office or a member of state or local law enforcement here in Colorado. So that's an example of the rule of law actually working at a time where we just feel like we're under attack every day and constitutional rights are being ignored by the Trump administration. The rule of law can work and it must work. One thing we've had in place in my office since 2019 is a plea policy for criminal cases with immigration consequences. So what that means is if you have a shoplift from Target, for example, that level of theft can qualify or trigger deportation proceedings against the person. We, as an office in 2019, working with immigration attorneys and advocates, I adopted a plea policy that our deputy DAs now follow, where anytime immigration consequences are a possibility, they are directed to consider other outcomes for the case that are still at the same level. So, for example, a shoplifted target, there are other charges at the same exact level of crime that we could resolve the case without triggering possible deportation. All the resources, if you want to learn more, are available on the district attorney website. Again, I'm the district attorney for Boulder County, and you could just Google it and you'll find all these resources available on our website if you're interested in learning more or bringing them to law enforcement and a district attorney in your jurisdiction. So this picture is one we're all too familiar with. To me, and I want to be very clear here, ICE should never be wearing masks. I think it's an outrageous violation of who we are as a country and who we want our law enforcement officers to be and how we want them to conduct themselves. I've had the honor of working with outstanding women and men in law enforcement on serious cases for many, many years. First as a prosecutor in New York City, where I handled gang homicides and other serious and scary cases, the King Soopers mass shooting, the Pearl Street firebombing. None of those officers, none of those detectives wear masks. The idea that ICE is wearing masks to protect their identity because they want to keep themselves safe is complete BS. Also, to me, it violates what we require of law enforcement officers. There are two ways to get these masks down, both of which I'm absolutely committed to pursuing. The first is the Attorney General and AG Phil Weiser is doing this right now, can bring a lawsuit demanding that ICE take down their masks in the state of Colorado. That lawsuit's underway. Legislatures could also introduce legislation demanding that ICE not wear a mask and provide identification, including a name and a badge number, when they're out in the community. That legislation's been introduced in Colorado, and I'm interested to see what the governor does with it. And there's a lot going on behind the scenes right now. We can talk more about it if you have questions on that. But ICE should not be wearing masks in our communities. I'll touch briefly on what happened in Minneapolis, where we saw community members being gunned down by federal agents. First, the flooding of Minneapolis with 3,000 federal agents. I view that as an act of retaliation by the federal government. I view it as an outrageous violation of Minnesota and Minneapolis's rights as a state and as a city and as a community. I believe it's retaliation, and I say that because Minnesota, Minneapolis, they do not have a higher level or percentage of undocumented immigrants living there. They don't have a higher percentage of undocumented immigrants with a criminal history or criminal record there. So there's no objective reason for 3,000 federal agents to have been sent there. The only reason to me is retaliation. So I worry about what that means for Colorado, because I believe the retaliation directed at Minnesota was in response to laws and policies that contradict what the Trump administration believes should be in place. And certainly Colorado will be on the short list of those things. So I joined in an amicus brief filed in federal district court in Minnesota a couple months ago, demanding that the federal government provide an objective rationale for being there with that level of presence. And that's making its way through the court system. But in the meantime, we continue to see mask and private prisons being built. And we saw the shootings of individuals in Minneapolis. And I view it first and foremost as tragic and horrific and just so sad for all the reasons that you know. You watched the videos, and I don't have to convince you how terrible those were. But also maddening from my perspective for this reason. As district attorney for Boulder County, I have the responsibility of overseeing any time an officer uses deadly physical force, of overseeing an independent, multi-agency investigation that has no involvement of the agency that the officer who fired his or her weapon belongs to. Those investigations, the integrity of those investigations is of paramount importance to the ultimate conclusion, but also maintaining the trust and confidence of the communities that are being impacted. It was maddening to me to watch the federal government do the exact opposite of what we have in place here in Colorado under state law, where it has to be a multi-agency team, independent, transparent, with the decisions made by the district attorney and then shared with the public. None of those things, in fact, the exact opposite of those things, were underway. I also thought that, just speaking candidly, But the district attorney, attorney general, and governor should have come out more forcefully right in the first few hours to say, we are going to conduct a full investigation and there will be consequences for crimes committed by ICE and other federal agents. And certainly the rest of us are on notice all around the country to be ready when this happens. So I just wrote a op-ed, a guest opinion that appeared in the paper with another district attorney from a neighboring jurisdiction, making very clear to the people in our communities that's what we promise to deliver: full investigations and consequences when ICE commits crimes. I'm sometimes asked, what if the federal government refuses to cooperate? Be my hope that they'd cooperate, but even if they don't, most people who commit murder do not cooperate with the investigation or prosecution of the case. And there are tools we have to advance investigations, even if there's a lack of cooperation. And I view it as my sworn duty to conduct a full investigation and hold people fully accountable. When the United States Vice President says ICE has absolute immunity, that is absolutely false. Just as a legal matter, that is not true. ICE has to be held accountable when they commit crimes because no one is above the law. And I promise you, that's how I will always pursue justice without fear and without favor. Birthright citizenship and Trump's attempt to revoke it was really the start for us of Trump 2.0 and the threat and the force that he was going to bring against our immigrants. So, birthright citizenship is a clear and, to me, obvious constitutional right under the 14th Amendment. If you don't agree with me, well, if you don't agree with me, you're probably not on this call. But if you don't agree with me, I would ask you to agree with the U.S. Supreme Court, which in 1898, reaffirmed that it's a constitutional right. As a result, hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people have built their lives around this constitutional protection. This case, the birthright citizenship case, was just heard by the U.S. Supreme Court last week. I would anticipate a decision from the U.S. Supreme Court by the end of June, which is when their term ends every year. I'm actually optimistic, if not hopeful, that that decision will go our way. I say that because it's so blatantly obvious that it's a constitutional right for people with birthright citizenship. And I say so blatantly obvious because judges, including the judge on this third bullet point, an appointee of President Ronald Reagan, who's been on the bench for over 40 years, said, I can't remember another case where the question presented was as clear that Trump's order revoking birthright citizenship is blatantly unconstitutional. They've lost the birthright citizenship case in every federal district court that's heard it thus far. So I'm going to continue to hold out hope and hope that the fight in front of the U.S. Supreme Court produces the right result. We do have protections in place here in Colorado. The first that I want to share with you is around courthouses. For the reasons I said earlier, Colorado law now prohibits ICE from arresting people for immigration detainers anywhere in or in the immediate surrounding areas around a courthouse. And for each of these, I include the statutory citation where you can find it under the law in Colorado. And there's a flyer that I have in the last slide. And that flyer has all this information and it's available on the DA website. So in other words, if you're taking notes right now, you're welcome to do that, but you don't need to. This is all available on my website if you want to look at it later. But I think this protection is really important so that people are aware, whether it's a traffic stop, domestic violence case, you name it, people have a right to be in and around courthouses without being arrested. There are counties in there are counties in Colorado where I worry that law enforcement's not following the law on this. There are sanctions when they fail to do so. Civil actions could be brought by the individual who's arrested in or around a courthouse. Also, contempt of court citations can be brought by the district attorney and by the chief judge, which is what we are prepared to do here in Boulder County. Also, an attorney general can bring a civil action on behalf of the person or on behalf of the state. So there are sanctions in place if ICE makes an arrest in or around a courthouse other than an immigration courthouse. So in other words, the federal courthouses where immigration matters are being heard, that doesn't have the same state protection. This applies to any justice center, any state, local, or municipal courthouse in the state of Colorado. What other areas are protected? Really important question because early in his second term, Donald Trump revoked a protection that had been in place for over 10 years. prohibiting ICE from making immigration detention arrests in schools or healthcare facilities. As a result, ICE would then be allowed and is now allowed in other states to conduct enforcement actions in those areas, which to me denies people the right to an education and denies people the right to health care, including emergency medical care. So I'm proud to live and work in a state and to have been a part of the effort under Senate Bill 276 to put those protections back in place. So Senate Bill 276 passed last year. It's now the law in the state of Colorado. ICE is not allowed to make an arrest of anyone receiving medical treatment in what's called a related facility. Under the definition of a related facility under the law, it's actually a long list of things, not just emergency rooms and urgent care, but also doctor's offices, rehab centers, treatment centers, and so on. The list is pretty lengthy, and it covers all the different kinds of healthcare facilities we have. Also, ICE is not allowed to enter any non-public area of public schools, child care centers, and then I hit on the healthcare facilities. But this prohibits ICE from making any arrest inside of schools. The idea, of course, being the logic being that people should be able to take their kids to school without fearing deportation for them and their families when they're inside the school. This bill also did a number of other things that I'll just highlight quickly. Importantly, it expands protections to local public institutions, such as the ones I have in that bullet point, and prohibits them from information sharing with ICE. So if right now some ICE agent's walking into the Boulder Public Library and says, "Hey, I want to look at John Smith's library card or library record," the library is not allowed to provide it unless there's a court ordered warrant being provided. And by that, I mean a document that says warrant at the top and is signed by a judge at the bottom. Not a detainer, not a letter, not a request. It has to be a judicially approved warrant. Also, under the law now in Colorado, anytime someone enters a plea of guilty on a criminal offense, they have to be informed of the possible immigration consequences that may result. So if you've ever been in court or if you watch Law and Order, when someone enters a guilty plea, they're asked a number of questions. Those questions have to include, have you been advised of the possible immigration consequences as a result of this guilty plea? Under the law in Colorado, if they did not receive that advisement and entered a guilty plea, that is now an unconstitutional guilty plea. They can get that guilty plea back, as we call it, and they can continue to litigate the case given the severe consequences that may result. Also, jails. Jails are no longer allowed to hold people for ICE when ICE makes a request. Jails have to release a person within 6 hours under the law. So that allows jails enough time to do the administrative process, but to not hold people to the next day or the days ahead for ICE to get there and pick someone up. That's a really important one. I think that's significant because there were jails in Colorado that were holding people for ICE to come, and ICE sometimes took a day or two to get there. Under the law, that is now an unconstitutional arrest and absolutely unlawful. All of these agencies I've touched on, the public agencies and organizations, have to have policies in place as of September 1st of 2025, outlining the restrictions on giving information to ICE. The idea being that let's say there's a 20-year-old working at the Boulder Public Library right now. I don't expect that person to be up to speed on the laws that are getting passed in the legislature. So this bill also required, and now law, also requires that the public library have policies in place so that employees know what can and absolutely cannot be provided if federal immigration agents come in. So let's talk about the authority of ICE, and Tiffany touched on this at the start, which I appreciated, but it's really important that we understand what authority ICE actually has. So some of these are basic, but it leads to a more significant point. Federal officers enforce federal laws. So ICE has the authority since 2003 as an agency to enforce federal immigration laws. Local police officers enforce state and local laws. So your city police department, sheriff's office enforces state and local laws. Where it becomes more relevant for our work and our discussion here, federal officers can only perform local law enforcement functions, for example, traffic stops, if there's a state law that grants them that power. And in Colorado, that power is not conferred to ICE. ICE does not have that power. So if I roll through a stop sign on the way home, ICE does not have the power to pull me over and give me a ticket. Where we saw that come to a head was with the shooting of Renee Good in Minneapolis. And you may recall different talking heads on the media, different sides of the media on this, talking about whether ICE was conducting a traffic stop or ICE was stopping her for interfering with their actions. If it was a traffic stop, they absolutely are prohibited from conducting that kind of law enforcement action. If it's interference, federal officers are allowed to take action. That's why it ends up being an issue for us to consider and discuss, especially if you're going out to protest. Federal officers can take action against people who interfere with their operations or assault an officer. They're not allowed to engage in what are traditional or local law enforcement functions. So I'll skip down to talking about warrants. This bullet point I just pulled up on the screen is particularly important in Colorado right now. ICE does not need a warrant to arrest someone if they can show two things. First, that the person is subject to deportation, that they're violating our immigration laws. And second, that the person's a flight risk. The issue here is that ICE is picking up people who've been living in community for 30 years, 40 years, who have families, jobs, community ties, and ICE taking them into custody is a violation of the law. So there's actually a case pending in front of the federal district court in Denver. You can look it up and follow it. And the hearings thus far have gone really well for the immigrants who are involved in the lawsuit there. And they're represented by a civil attorney, a leader in the immigration space, who often does these presentations with me, by the way. His name's Hans Meyer. Hans and his team are working with other attorneys on behalf of the young woman who was arrested coming in from Utah and other immigrants who the federal government has failed to show are a flight risk. They should have been given a ticket and ordered to appear, not taken into custody. Also, importantly, warrants are required to enter any private space, such as a home. ICE needs a warrant to enter someone's public space. The U.S. Constitution, when it comes to search and seizure and warrants, does not distinguish between citizens and non-citizens. If you open the U.S. Constitution, it doesn't say law enforcement needs a search warrant for U.S. citizens, but not for other people. That's not what it says under the Constitution. So these laws apply to everyone equally. I'm going to talk briefly about the training of ICE agents. The federal government proudly announced that they were reducing the amount of hours and days of training, and I think we've seen the horrific results of that lack of training. In Colorado, as a state, the Attorney General's office is responsible for the training for law enforcement throughout the entire state. So whether you're joining the La Plata County Sheriff's Office, Boulder PD, Fort Morgan Police Department, you name it, the training actually comes from the Attorney General. The training, both in the academy and then post-academy in their agency where they're starting the work, usually, well, it's always full-time, at least 5 days a week, and it goes for anywhere from 9 months to 12 months. ICE agents are receiving a fraction of that training. Congress should pass a law requiring that ICE agents have the same level of training as state and local law enforcement, especially when they're engaging in such aggressive actions in our community. We're continuing to see ICE violating people's rights and hurting people. And we've seen, and I've prosecuted successfully, state and local law enforcement who've made mistakes and committed crimes, even after all the training that they go through. This is an area that I've talked to some of the congressional representatives from Colorado about. We should see more training requirements being introduced in Congress and hopefully in the future being passed. Also, body-worn cameras should be required of ICE agents, and we've seen now a policy from the Department of Homeland Security changing around that. But that should be the law, and I would hope that Congress would introduce a bill to actually pursue body-worn cameras being required for ICE agents. A couple things about ICE arrests, just quickly. The data on this is important to me because it pushes back on the false narrative of the Trump administration, which said they were only going to arrest the worst of the worst and only the criminals would be arrested. The data has shown that roughly 1/3 of all the people arrested by ICE have no criminal record whatsoever. And that number's continued to go down, or excuse me, up. The number of people with a criminal record has gone down. So CBS News recently got a data release from the Department of Homeland Security showing that only 14% of the people being picked up by ICE have any sort of criminal record. Less than 2% have any confirmed gang ties. The Trump narrative is completely false. That's why I share this data, and the data continues to change and change for the worse from my perspective. So when it comes to ICE, there are some things that you can do and some things that I want to make sure you're aware of. You can film, but you cannot interfere because you would face possible arrest and prosecution. You can film. What I mean by that is under the state law in Colorado, you're allowed to film any member of law enforcement conducting any activity in public. So even if it's a traffic stop by your local police department, you're allowed to stand there and film them. That's protected by law. You can't interfere or you could be subject to arrest and prosecution. There's no magic number of feet that you have to stand back when ICE is conducting operation. The way to really think of it is you cannot stand between ICE agents and the target of their action. Otherwise, you could be subject to an arrest and prosecution in federal court. If you're filming, the only way ICE can get your phone, there's two ways. One is to say, ask you, hey, can I have your phone? It's up to you if you turn it over or not. Without your consent, they can't take it. They need a warrant to take your phone. The most secure way to keep your phone locked down is to have the passcode that you punch in, the number code that you punch in. So, for example, if you have Face ID, someone could hold up your phone to your face and it would open your phone. Or fingerprint ID, someone could put your fingerprint on your phone and open your phone. That wouldn't be right, but that could be done. So I would encourage you, if you're out there monitoring ICE actions and protesting, to use the number code to get into your own phone. If you're out there protesting or showing up where ICE is, you can demand that ICE remove their mask and that they provide identification, but it's not yet required by state or federal law. You are permitted to film vehicles and license plates, and I'll talk about where you can report that information in just a couple minutes. I really want to stress, though, I know we're living through an incredibly tense and scary time, period. I also don't want to see anybody getting hurt or getting arrested. So, for example, I was down in La Plata County on a Saturday a few weeks ago. I've been doing these trainings all around the state of Colorado because the fight is on. And I was down in La Plata County, and an older gentleman in the back of the room asked me if he could bring his gun with him when he goes to protest ICE. And Durango, which is where which is in La Plata County, beautiful community, but they've had some highly intense, difficult interactions with ICE in that community since Trump 2.0 got underway. And he asked me if he could bring his gun. He has a concealed carry permit. As I told him, I'm a very goal-focused person. So you have a legal right to bring your gun, but what's your goal? Why are you going there? And he explained he was going there because he wants to document what ICE is doing and make sure that they're not violating the law. I said, bring your phone. You don't need your gun for that. You're going to be outnumbered and outgunned. So go and film and exercise your right to protest and do that, but do not put yourself at risk and take steps to make sure you don't end up being at risk. There are some things that business owners can do, and by business owners, I mean hotels, restaurants, construction sites, you name it. One is pretty simple, but significant, which is posting a sign saying areas are private and for employees only. So I had breakfast at a diner recently in South Boulder. A big fan of diners, by the way, separate discussion for another time. But I was at the diner and I was very pleased because between the seating area and the kitchen area, there's a big sign that says private employees only. The power of that sign is that law enforcement, local, state, federal, cannot cross the threshold into a private area without a warrant. So if they came in looking for someone who works in the kitchen and that sign is up, they're not allowed legally past that area. They're trespassing if they cross that threshold. So if you work in a office and you have areas that are private. So for example, I'm sitting in Rocky Mountain Equality. Their lobby is a public space, but they can and do have signs that say private for the office spaces. So law enforcement's not allowed past those thresholds without a search warrant. Also, importantly, business owners should be training their employees on the right to remain silent. We all have a constitutional right to remain silent. So if ICE came into that diner and asked the wait staff, hey, is Joe working in the kitchen today? They can, and I would suggest should say, I'm not allowed to talk to you. talk to my boss, or I'm just not allowed to talk to you. I'm not going to answer any questions. It's also helpful, especially because those are stressful moments, to practice those with employees. Encourage immigrant employees, neighbors, friends, family members to complete a prep kit. These are available on the DA website, but also on immigration nonprofit websites. And I could send it out to Tiffany if she wants to email it to all the attendees. I have a sample one from immigration advocacy organization. These prep kits are really important for two reasons. First, much like you may have for a fire or a flood, it provides information on what the person wants to have done with their property. Sadly, and really scary reality is there's also sections on what the person wants done with the car, home, and their kids. But it's helpful for someone to have their wishes honored, especially because the deportation process can happen really quickly. The second practical impact of that is if an immigration attorney is retained, hired to represent the person, they actually charge less if the prep kit's filled out in advance, because that reduces the number of hours and the amount of work they have to do in figuring all that stuff out. So instead of trying to have to spend time figuring out where should the kids go, what should happen with the home, what should happen with the car, if that's all documented in advance, immigration attorneys will tell you that they'll charge less, and they will, because they don't have to try to scramble to get all that information together and put it all together from point A. It's already been completed. One thing I would highlight always is immigrants should be paid a fair wage. This is not a new problem in the United States. Immigrants for far too long have been taken advantage of and victimized because they're a vulnerable and marginalized community. So it's why we fought in 2019, and I was a part of this effort to get the wage theft bill passed in Colorado, making it a felony for anybody to commit wage theft, which is almost always committed against low income workers, particularly immigrants, because unscrupulous employers believe that they will not report to law enforcement because they're scared of the immigration consequences. It's also why we changed the law around extortion in Colorado. If someone now threatens immigration consequences to try to coerce or compel someone to engage in some activity, for example, not calling law enforcement when their uh, paycheck is ripped off, that is extortion under the law as well in Colorado. This is the flyer I referenced. It's in English and Spanish on the district attorney website. I've covered most of what's in the flyer here. If you want to take a look at the flyer, I also include the statutory references. So these are the laws. A couple of things you could do with this flyer. First, if you haven't already, I really encourage you to reach out to your local law enforcement agency, your police chief or your sheriff, and say you want to discuss immigration concerns with them. Even if they say no, at least you have that documented. And I think that goes a long way if problems end up happening later on. If they say yes, go in armed with the law for the state of Colorado and say, this is the law. Are your sheriff's deputies or patrol officers all instructed to follow these laws in this jurisdiction? Also, on this flyer, there's information on what to do if you witness misconduct by ICE or other federal agents. You can report it to the district attorney's office, to immigration advocates, but also the attorney general's office. Phil Weiser's office launched an online portal, and you can go on their website and make those reports online to the attorney general's office directly. Also, importantly, on that flyer, I emphasize that no one is above the law, and there will be full investigations when ICE commits crimes in Boulder County. And I will definitely continue to push for that for the entire state of Colorado. I do think having these conversations with law enforcement is important because we may find allies in that fight for immigrants, as we have in Boulder County, but also making sure law enforcement's on notice that community members are armed with this knowledge and that we expect and demand the law to be followed in every jurisdiction. So I'm going to take down my screen in a minute, but before I do, that's my email address, and that's actually my cell phone number. I give out my cell phone number in every one of these presentations. Please don't be the group that calls me after midnight and my wife then makes me stop sending out my cell phone number. It hasn't blown up on me yet. It's been a year or so that I've been passing on my cell phone numbers in these Know Your Rights presentations, but feel free to call and text me if you have issues. I'll take down the screen, Tiffany, if that works. And Tiffany and Morgan, you can feel free to walk me through the questions however you like.
Yep.
We've got them all set and ready right here. Um, Thank you. Good luck on your campaign this year. And
Thank you.
it's always nice to see another New Yorker. I grew up between Lincoln Center and Central Park. So we do have a lot of questions. So I want everybody to know we will go through them as quickly as possible. But if we don't get to any, it is strictly because we don't have time. And usually we will send those in a follow-up email to get the answers for you. So if that's okay, I'll go ahead and get started. The
Sure.
first question we've got is, does the Attorney General's office want information on to hold how hold room is violating zoning, but the city doesn't care?
So yes, I think you should report that. I'm not in the Attorney General's office right now, but yes, that should be reported to the Attorney General's office.
Okay. Um, I think somebody was asking to volunteer about the petition, initiative petition we talked about earlier. But she said she's in the Colorado Springs area. Who should people contact to volunteer for it?
You can contact me directly at Michael Dougherty, CO at gmail.com. And that would be great. Thank you.
Okay. If masked men with guns came to kidnap me, I would call the police. Can,
Yes.
would, or should local police stop ICE from kidnapping people in that situation?
I'm so glad you asked, and I should have mentioned it earlier. So, yes, you should call 911. That is an absolute important first step. There's no downside to calling 911. And there are three benefits. First, they will and have to respond, so police will show up. Second, they'll have body worn cameras on as soon as they arrive, because that's the state law here in Colorado. So their body worn cameras will be activated when they arrive on scene, and that's a great form of evidence and documentation. Third, in Colorado, there's what's called a duty to intervene. Under the law, all law enforcement is required to intervene when they see another member of law enforcement engaging in a crime. So, for those three reasons, definitely call 911. I'm so glad you asked that question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, if you're elected, how would you help non-citizen veterans that cross paths with the criminal justice system from getting deported?
So, two ways. First, we have a veterans treatment program here in Boulder County, and second, and importantly, I would take statewide what I have in the district attorney's office here in Boulder County that's been incredibly successful, which is not requiring people to plead guilty to offenses that are going to trigger deportation consequences. So I've had that policy in place since 2019. It's available on the website. The defense bar in Boulder County thinks very highly of it, and they could speak to the value of it. And I would definitely bring it statewide.
Okay. Um, what do you think about Trump calling Colorado an immigrant-friendly state?
Well, I don't recall him saying that exactly, but I believe you that he did. And what I would say is I'm proud of that fact, plain and simple.
I I think we should be an immigrant-friendly country. That's kind of one of our founding tenets, but that's a whole nother conversation. Um, if a sheriff of Pueblo had a DUI, I'm assuming pulled somebody over for a DUI and turned him over to ICE recently, what proof do we need to report this to the Attorney General?
So, and I saw a question from Sarah too, and I'll combine the two if that's okay. The
Sure.
sheriffs have the responsibility and legal authority of running the jails and then also patrolling unincorporated parts of every county. So, unincorporated meaning, as you may know, the areas that are not cities or municipalities. So the sheriff can and does have legal authority to make arrest on criminal cases. So if it's for a DUI case and they're arresting someone who's under the influence and driving and that person's an immigrant, the person would still be arrested. I do think it's important to highlight that the jail is a really vulnerable spot for immigrants because the information on who's in the jail is public, which makes sense. So if my brother was arrested tonight, be a bad day for the Dohertys. But if he was arrested tonight, I should be able to figure out where he was and locate him and figure out what the bond is. So that's all publicly available information. So that's why it's a particularly tenuous time for people to be going to the jail if they have immigration concerns. But I hope I answered that question, Morgan. I'm not sure if I hit it right.
It
I,
sounded
I
like the sheriff actually turned them over to ICE. So if
Oh,
that was the case, they're asking what evidence they would need to talk to the attorney general about it.
thank you so much. I
It,
misunderstood. I'm sorry.
yeah, it
So,
was rumored that the sheriff turned him over, but after Michael's information about it being public, it's quite possible that,
Okay.
so I'll look into that further. But yeah,
thank you, Sally. And the other thing you could do is order that body worn camera video from the arrest and see if there's any communication with ICE on the video. I would encourage you to do that. And then asking for, you could submit a records request to the sheriff's office for any communication between the sheriff's office and ICE about that particular individual.
All right. Tell us more about what's going on behind the scenes with the law about ICE wearing masks and what the governor will do.
So I'm going to answer the question directly because that's the way I roll. But I want to emphasize I'm not 100% sure I'm right yet or not. But from what I understand from a conversation earlier today, the governor has voiced concerns and perhaps opposition to Senate Bill 5, which I think is, if that's correct, and I believe it might be, then I think that's outrageous. And apparently, the governor's explanation is that he believes it would violate the sovereignty clause. I don't view the law the same way. I also think Colorado should continue to be fairly aggressive in standing up and fighting for the rights of immigrants and all our people. So I hope that's not the case, but I do believe that might be the situation, in which case I'll be very outspoken about it once it's confirmed.
Okay. We have a question that says, how do we stop the MAGA takeover of the Supreme Court? I think meaning making decisions that are, you know, against what we would want, because as far as I'm concerned, they've already taken over the Supreme Court.
So I think it's the power of elections. You know this because you're a highly engaged group. So I feel like I'm preaching to the choir. Or it's that old George Carlin joke about people who show up for a motivational seminar don't need to be motivated. They're already showing up. So I know you're already in the fight, but it's the power of elections because the Republicans had a ground game that allowed them to take over the White House, and then you fill the U.S. Supreme Court with people who share their views. So we have to make sure we win these next elections. They're obviously critically important. I think that's the long-term way of doing it, and then continuing to bring cases where it's clear the facts and the law are on our side, like the birthright citizenship case.
Okay. This is, I think, referring to the Colorado law about not arresting people in certain places. And the question is, was it not possible to have the same protections at the federal courthouse where immigration court is held because it's federal property? What about the areas surrounding it?
That is correct because it's federal property, both the courthouse and the immediate surrounding area. Those areas are not protected by state law, unfortunately.
Okay. Is ICE truly a federal agency or a division of Trump Incorporated?
Or I think I get your point. I agree with your point, but they are technically a federal agency, yes.
Does ICE have the ability to stop and detain a person based upon the color of their skin, thanks to the Supreme Court? Why would they need to claim a traffic violation?
They can only take people into custody if they have reason to believe that the person is subject to deportation and also a flight risk.
Okay. Um, this question is, what are the different types of warrants? And I think my understanding is asking the difference between an administrative warrant and a judicial warrant.
So the judicial warrant is one that says warrant at the top and is signed by a judge at the bottom. So not by a member of ICE or an authority in the federal government.
And an administrative warrant is coming from ICE where they sign it at the bottom.
Correct.
It's not a judicial, it's not a judge saying this person has something that they're convicted of that they need to be arrested for.
Yes.
Okay. What can you advise regarding NSPM7? How can we protect ourselves, and how would you, as Attorney General, help protect activists during this third Red Scare?
So I think part of it is making sure that we have protections in place around data and data privacy. That's something that can happen at the state level. I think that's really important. Also, reducing the opportunity for mass surveillance. It's why I believe that flock cameras are so incredibly concerning, that law enforcement agencies don't have complete control over who can access flock cameras. So ICE has been able to access flock. So making sure we have more protections in place around data privacy and digital privacy goes a long way to that.
And I don't know if you said this before, what is NSPM7?
My understanding is what the question is referring to is individuals who are concerned about their information being learned by the federal government. But I could be, if I'm confusing that with something else, they should tell me.
Okay.
I could clarify that a little bit. I think it's a little bit more than that from my understanding, at least. NSPM is, my understanding is that it is creating a legal framework by which to prosecute individuals for pre-crime uh, ideology, essentially. And there's a bullet point list of that ideology that includes anti capitalism, anti Americanism, anti Christianity, hostility to traditional American values, traditional family values, etc. So I agree completely. Data security is absolutely essential, but your answer didn't address that legal framework, and that legal framework is terrifying as anybody who is in this group.
I'm terrified, but I'm also interested to learn more. Do you have a link where I can get more information from it?
I'll
Yeah.
drop it. You'll find something amusing in the chat. I tried to take a screenshot of it, and that's what I got. But here is the link. So yeah, this was the executive order where he basically said everyone protesting is a domestic terrorist.
Yes, no, that's what I was referring to. I do think so thank you for that, Alice. You're absolutely right. It's very scary what you've described. I do think the privacy requirements around different things are really the key to stopping some of this information getting to the federal government. So that's why I emphasize that. And I think we have to make sure that we continue to push back on this and that attorneys general bring lawsuits against it because it does violate our rights.
Okay. Is an employee-only area in a business, whether or not posted as private, a private area that ICE needs a judicial warrant to enter?
So yes, the answer is yes. But it's much easier and better to have it marked as a private area because then it's clear what the designation is and there's no opportunity for law enforcement to say they didn't realize it was private.
Okay. Do you have numbers of how many American citizens have been detained? As of last October, pre-Minneapolis, it was 170, but I can't imagine how many it is now.
I was just looking at the numbers for Colorado the other night. I don't recall off the top of my head. I think it was 4,000 total just for Colorado, but I'd have to go back and look. It was an article 2 or 3 days ago that I was looking at.
Okay. Private businesses do have the right to refuse entry, correct? Unless a specific judicial warrant is presented. I'm in the restaurant business. My restaurants would never ever opened, much less survived without my immigrant family.
So yes, you are correct, and yes, I'm grateful to hear that restaurants are doing that.
Well, even if it's like a public area where people can go in the restaurant, the owner or employees can say, no, you can't come in at all.
Correct.
Okay, cool.
And this is our last question regarding being a flight risk. Wasn't there a ruling recently that said they don't have to be considered a flight risk to leave the country, but they can be detained if ICE thinks they are a flight risk to leave the curb they're sitting on? Or was that a change in instructions to ICE agents from DHS?
So ICE has to have reason to believe and to be able to show to the court what that reasonable basis was, that the person is a flight risk. And that's the court case that's making its way through federal district court in Denver.
And that was my question. I was wondering because I remember a while ago that flight risk changed from being a flight risk of leaving the country to being a flight risk from leaving where I'm sitting you on the curb right now. And I didn't know if that was actually a ruling or just the DHS instructions to ICE agent.
The court is the case in front of the court right now is whether the person's a flight risk that they're not going to show for court, that they're going
Okay.
to try to avoid the jurisdiction and authority of the court.
So that's the last question I have. Does anybody else have more questions? Last call. All right. Thank you very much.
Well,
Yeah, thank you. This was really great, Michael.
This was a very interesting presentation, and I'm glad you came.
Happy to be here. I really appreciate Tiffany working with me to get this scheduled. So Tiffany, thank you for
Simon.
Yeah.
And thank you, everyone. It's conversations like this that fill me with hope. We can't just, I know I'm preaching to the choir, but we can't just crawl into the fetal position right now. So let's stay engaged, stay active, and stay in the fight. And let me know what I could do to help you. I promise to stand shoulder to shoulder with you and continue to be a leader on this. And thank you so much, everyone. Feel free to reach out to me with any questions you have or anything you want to talk about.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all and have a good night.
You too.
All right. You too.